The winner to organize the 2022 FIFA World Cup is Qatar.
In the decade after Qatar won the right to host the World Cup, the global attention it drew to the tiny Gulf state wasn't always positive. Sure, there were 7 new stadiums and hundreds of hotels, impressive and beautiful, springing apparently effortlessly from the sand of this tiny peninsula. $250 billion is what it all cost. Small change for one of the richest states on the planet. But the world also saw migrant workers living under conditions of modern slavery, as well as violent anti-LGBT policies. So, has Qatar's image been tarnished more than enhanced? And if so, was holding the World Cup a mistake? To answer this question, we need to know what Qatar wants. And to understand that, we need to look at the forces that shaped its global ambitions. Qatar is the 4th richest country in the world. The average Qatari household takes home about £250,000 per year. Healthcare is virtually free for citizens, housing too. There are no individual taxes, and education is provided by the state. Its 300,000 citizens are so rich that they don't even know what to do with all their money. Big cats as pets, sports cars, dancing robots. Sure. It wasn't always like this. Until the 1950s, Qatar was impoverished, one of the poorest countries in the world. But in 1949, everything changed. It struck oil. By the 1990s, Qatar was exporting natural gas too. It has the 3rd largest gas reserves in the world. Rolling in fossil fuel cash by the new millennium, construction in the capital Doha took off. Soon the city boasted some of the most glamorous architecture in the world. But all that wealth brought insecurity. With a tiny population, Qatar had no army to protect it from the more powerful nations that surround it. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Iran, Iraq. This point was proven in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait, another tiny asset-rich Gulf state. After an international military intervention, Iraq withdrew the following year. But it taught Qatar that it was vulnerable to aggression from its bigger neighbors. Kuwait had been all but invisible to the larger world. Qatar wouldn't make that mistake. It saw greater global visibility as a form of protection, and so began a period of grandstanding, building prestige and influence on the world stage. It grew economic power, using its $450 billion sovereign wealth fund to exert economic influence everywhere. London's Canary Wharf? Check. The Olympic Village and the Shard? Check. Harrods, hotels, and 20% of Heathrow Airport? Check. Barclays Bank? Check. The Empire State Building? Check. Suddenly, it owned £270 billion in international assets. It grew diplomatic power, playing broker between forces in the Middle East and even greater powers in the West. In 2013, the Taliban opened an office in Doha, where an end to the 20-year war in Afghanistan was negotiated with the US. They mediated between the US and Iran over the broken nuclear deal. And by building relations with militant groups in the region, they secured the release of Western hostages. And it grew cultural power, founding Pan-Arabian news channel Al Jazeera. By 2020, it had 1.4 billion viewers around the world. The World Cup looked set to be the latest triumph in this security strategy. What better spectacle to attract the eyes and admiration of the whole world? Except it seemed to go horribly wrong.
Now, with just weeks to go until the World Cup kicks off.
In a tiny desert dictatorship.
Allegations of vote buying.
Its record on human rights.
And the LGBTQ plus community.
It seemed to go wrong. But did it? In one sense, yes. Qatar failed to anticipate the backlash against its autocratic and racist regime. But in another sense, no. With a war in Europe threatening energy supplies, Qatar is richer and more powerful amongst its Western allies than ever before. Most importantly, though, Qatar has adopted a new security strategy, one that doesn't need the world to be impressed. In 2014, Qatar joined the Saudi-led coalition of Gulf states that has bombed Yemen for the past 8 years, using Western jets and missiles. 400,000 people have so far died. But in 2017, Qatar was ejected from that coalition. Its neighbors accused it of supporting terrorist groups. Earlier that year, it reportedly paid nearly $1 billion to militants in Iraq and Syria in exchange for the release of captured members of its royal family. In return, Saudi Arabia and its Gulf allies imposed a punishing 4-year blockade on the country, stopping goods from being carried across their borders or through their airspace. In response to this new insecurity, Qatar has been building its military power, much to the delight of the Western arms trade, and the World Cup has provided useful cover. In October, the RAF sent 200 personnel and 8 Typhoon fighters to train Qatar's Air Force. They claim it's to provide air security operations for the World Cup. It's the first joint squadron the RAF has formed with anyone since the Second World War. It joins 24 brand new British Typhoon jets and Hawk Mk167s recently sold to Qatar by the UK. In the last 5 years, its arms imports have increased by 369%. Alongside the British jets, it bought French Rafales and US F-15s. It bagged anti-ship missiles, radars, combat ships and tanks too. And Qatar has silently spent hundreds of millions on advanced warfare technology, a veritable shopping list of top-shelf destruction, all, apparently, to protect football fans. Perhaps most importantly, in January, President Biden nominated Qatar as a major non-NATO ally, recognizing it as a powerful US partner in the Gulf. This gave Qatar preferential access to US weapons. It joins other Middle Eastern human rights abusers given this special status: Bahrain, Egypt, and Israel. And right on cue, and just weeks before the World Cup opened, NATO quietly turned up to provide security support during the competition. 5 years ago, Qatar's World Cup disaster might have threatened its security by damaging the reputation it had carefully built. But though only half the size of Wales, Qatar is set to soon own more fighter jets than Spain. When the world's most expensive spectacle comes to an end, this super wealthy and outsized military power isn't likely to care what the rest of the planet thinks, as long as the West keeps selling Qatar arms. And it will.